Alright, continuing our lesson on completing the square. These two exercises are very similar to what we started with on the warm-up. Notice that the left-hand side is already a perfect square because half of 6 is 3. We square the 3, we get 9. So we can rewrite the left-hand side or factor it as x plus 3, quantity squared equals 36. And so now take the square root of both sides. X plus 3 is equal to, remember whenever you take the square root of a number when solving an equation, you need to have two answers, so plus or minus 6. And then subtract over the 3. X is equal to negative 3 plus or minus 6. Okay, now if you can add and subtract your numbers, if they're integers like this or if they're fractions that are easily added and subtracted, just go ahead and do it. So x is equal to, I have negative 3 plus 6, which would be just 3, or negative 3 minus 6, which is negative 9. So here's our two answers. What this means is, if we had this original equation and we had subtracted this 36 over, we could have factored it as x minus 3 times x plus 9. Okay, so there's another one for you to try at your leisure. Moving on. So on the other examples, like on this previous example, we already had a perfect square trinomial on the left-hand side. But it's not always going to be like that. For example, x squared plus 8x minus 6, not a perfect square. So this is where we want to complete the square. You're going to go ahead and take this negative 6 that's on the left-hand side, add it over to the right-hand side just to ignore it. I'm just going to leave a blank space here because we're going to have to add something in order to complete the square right here. So whatever we add to the left-hand side, you have to add it to the right-hand side so it stays equal. It stays balanced. That's the addition property. Alright, so in order to complete the square, you take that middle term, the 8x, and you just look at the number positive 8. You take half of it, which is 4, and you square that number, which is 16. So in order to complete the square, you're going to have to add 16 to both sides of this equation. Okay, so on the left-hand side, we now have a perfect square trinomial, and you can factor that as x plus 4. Remember, it's in the parentheses is always the number we get after we take half, and on the right-hand side, we're going to just get 22. Now it looks like one of those previous questions where all you got to do is take the square root of both sides. Remember that on the right-hand side, whenever you take the square root, solve an equation, you should get plus or minus. And then finally, subtract the 4 over. Of course, you want to look at that square root whenever you're done and see if you can simplify it. But square root of 22, you just have 2 and 11. Both of those are prime numbers. You can't do anything with it. Okay, so there's the answer. And then I'm going to point out again that these things are conjugates. You essentially have two answers here, right? You have x equals negative 4 plus square root 22 and negative 4 minus square root 22.